exactly 6 months ago, I think it was the 24th of, what was it, March or May? I can't remember. But anyway, I know for sure at the end of November, I've had this Nikon Z8 for 6 months. And in fact, I did a quick unboxing, a short, at this very table. I believe it was this very table here in the park. So here we are, 6 months later, and I'm going to talk about my experience so far with the Nikon Z8, because I think 6 months, I've given it a pretty good testing. I don't usually like to review things. I know that I'd probably get a lot more views if I pushed out a review right away, but I think I can speak with much more authority now that I've been using the Z8 for 6 months. So what I'm going to do in this video, we'll get to some technical stuff later, but I think I'll start off with some stills that I've shot with the camera, as well as some video clips. We'll see how things end up after editing, but that's the plan going forward, and I hope you'll stick around to see those and to hear my impressions. I'll keep that towards the end, the more technical stuff, but this is not going to be an exhaustive technical review because 6 months later there's been plenty of those, and so I'll keep it to my personal experiences, my personal impressions, and images and video that I've made with the Nikon Z8. Hi, Ray here. First off, I'll try to address some, not all, of the complaints about the Z8. There's always someone, I guess, who's missing something, and I get that not all use cases are the same. But in no particular order. GPS. No GPS. Now, my solution to that is a third-party GPS unit for just $50. No function 4 button. Fair enough, though I'm personally not short. Well, I'm short, but not in need of the extra function button. There's no flash sync. Sure, I can't use the Z8 with my old Ellen comms, which I rarely use. No Ethernet. I don't use Ethernet at all right now, but a dongle isn't too much trouble, is it? On the top controls, there's no flash button. There's a white balance instead, and I can see this as a minor irritation, but for me, with all the advances in flash photography, I'm needing quick access to that control less these days. Only one CF Express, SD for the second slot. So not quite as fast if you need backup to the secondary slot, shooting RAW especially. But as I've shown, I think in related videos, which I'll link at the end of this video, if you get a decent UHS-2 SD card, performance is still really quite good. We get full-size HDMI, just like the Z9, 2 USB-C ports, and that solves the issue of external power taking up port 1, as on the Z9, and it allows another peripheral like the MC M10 remote grip, for instance, to use the second port. That's a great addition. Really, really nice. We also get the Z9's backlit buttons, airplane tracking, skin softening and skin color tweak portrait impression balance it's called, and I hope that comes to the Z9. The 8 centimeter long LCD screen is horizontally and vertically, that tilts for 170 degrees viewing, I think it is, with sensitive touchscreen in 2100K dot resolution. As for the gripes about the EVF, here's what I said about the Z9, and it applies almost exactly to the Z8. The Z8 features a 1.27 centimeter, 0.5 inch, approximately 3690 dot quad VGA OLED EVF with a peak brightness of 3000 nits, 8 times magnification, 0.8 times magnification I should say, and it's a blackout free without frame substitution due to dual channel processing, meaning there are 2 image data channels from the 45.7 megapixel CMOS sensor, one for the EVF and one for still image capture. The dual X-Speed chips process both images simultaneously, so there's never a need to prioritize one stream over the other. It has a resolution of 3.69 million dots, which is less than some of its competitors, yes, but the Z8, like the Z9, provides an absolutely beautiful EVF experience due to its superior brightness and low latency. That's the lag between what occurs in front of the camera and the presentation of that scene in the viewfinder. So no blackout. The Z8's super fast readout, again same as the Z9, which enabled Nikon to dump the mechanical shutter altogether. That's the revolution at work here. So to sum up, lowest latency, highest brightness, no stutter or lag, makes this, I would argue, a superb EVF, despite its lesser resolution by the numbers. It's a real-time EVF. As with all Z cameras, you can use the FT-Z to adapt many f-mount lenses, and in my experience, without any loss of performance whatsoever. So in that way of looking at it, I'm kind of like Hudson Henry with less hair. Seriously, I said the same in the run-up to the Z9. I don't necessarily need the vertical grip. And I'd gotten used to smaller, lighter mirrorless cameras, my first mirrorless camera being a Fuji X Pro 2. But then, like Hudson, when I got my hands on the Z9, well, I totally fell in love with the form factor. The ergonomics, which are just superb. And the camera balances so well, especially with larger lenses. Still, it's certainly not cheap, with the Z9 in Canada at $6,999. But considering this camera really brings most of what the Z9 offers, and that's what this video is about, it's $1,600 less than the Z9's already competitive price. So the Z8 in Canada is $5,399. If you're enthusiastic about a camera, and if you've watched many of my camera videos here, Nikon cameras in particular, you'd say I've been mostly enthusiastic. So does that make me a fanboy? I don't think it does. I've genuinely loved every Z series camera and lens that I've bought over the past, 5 years now? Because they've worked almost flawlessly for every job that I've thrown at them. The Z9 in particular is a nearly perfect camera, as near perfect as anything I've ever owned. It does everything I expect of it. And so far, the Z8, well, it's been a very similar experience. I'm not going to gloss over teething troubles of the Z8, because mine was one of the early models, took possession on release day in May, as I said earlier. It was May, not March, as I said in the intro. And the first issue, the finicky lens mount, I actually ran across that momentarily right out of the box in the park. And then it resolved until one more time about 4 months later. So I was never really sure what was going on because it fixed itself after about 30 seconds. So when it comes to the strap lugs, again, my serial number was part of the alert. I don't generally use a strap, notwithstanding the ZF, but I sure want to make sure those lugs are secure, right? So I sent my camera in September during a lull in work, and it was back in my hands within a week. So I'm glad Nikon alerted us to the issues and fixed them promptly. Now, I'm not minimizing that the Z8 had these teething issues, but it didn't, in my case, have other issues that some people jumped on, like the claimed overheating problems. More on that later. But I covered that, I think, in the aforementioned card tests. But here's the thing about some reviewers I won't mention. It looks to me like they feel they have to uncover some disappointment in order to be seen as, objective, to avoid the label fanboy. In the same way, I guess some newspapers deem it necessary to balance their reporting by including complete bunk alongside irrefutable reality-based science, as if this established some kind of credibility, proved them fair and balanced. Clickbait headlines have further eroded credibility, in my view. You create the clickbait title, "Don't buy this brand until you watch this." Then you have to come up with some kind of negative to fit the narrative. So if I seem overly enthusiastic about a product, it's because I'm happy, not because I'm covering anything up. I don't feel I need to uncover some extreme and rare issue that 0.1% of users might run into. Where the technology is less than perfect, sure. At the end of the day, you're going to be frustrated if you try to use a hammer to remove a screw. And it might remove the screw, but shall we say rather inelegantly? And it wouldn't prove that a hammer is not in itself an excellent tool. Common issues specific to a particular camera are another thing, and they should totally be held up for valid criticism. Admittedly, it can be hard in this age of mass online disinformation to sort real issues from what are often manufactured FUD. So should I be more skeptical? Please let me know in the comments what you think about my presentation. The Z8 has already been tested widely from the Canadian Arctic to deserts and high mountains, and it's been praised as a totally solid camera. The accessory grip, aesthetically gag. I agree with others on that criticism. Couldn't Nikon have made it fit better with the camera's lines? Now, I don't see me needing one, but then I have a Z9. One of the most used features of Nikon cameras for me, for years now, is the inbuilt time-lapse function. I use it almost daily, and with the Z9 came 8K time-lapse, but only at 8-bit. The Z8 brings 10-bit using HEIF, so to implement that, you choose HLG for tone mode in the I menu. Then you'll see in the time-lapse menu, the video file type is locked to H.265 10-bit. It does take a bit more wrangling in post, that's for sure. And as usual, I'm using the flat profile. I'm not a time-lapse specialist willing to shoot raw and do all those post-processing things that are involved there. Of course, the Z series cameras include an interval timer function if you like. But I'm very happy with the results with this inbuilt time-lapse workflow. The results, to my eye, are fabulous. So thanks to Nikon for this improvement there. Now, as far as my Z history, if you will, when the second generation Z6 II and Z7 II arrived, I passed. When the Z9 was announced, as I've said a few times here, I didn't initially want an integrated battery grip, but the Z9 offered so much in the way of functionality, including the best in-class video specs. And for the life of me, I can't understand what people are talking about when they claim that isn't so. I did consider selling one of my Z6s, and I will now that I have the ZF, but the Z6 II just didn't offer enough over the first gen to justify the purchase. Of course, for some reason, I wasn't having the kind of focusing issues that so many complained about with the first gen Z cameras. For the last 7 years, mirrorless cameras have been my primary cameras. As I've said in many videos now, when the Z6 and 7 cameras came along in, late 2018, I was pretty excited. Well, I didn't buy until the next spring, but I bought my first Z6 in April 2019, then another a few months later, and I've never looked back. With the Z9 now as camera 1, no issues with recording time at all, with the kind of video shoots that I do. But using the Z6 as second or third angle now, overhead, I have run into that 30-minute record limit, even for these videos. So it is important for me that the Z8 solves that issue as a second angle video camera. Another related thing about the Z8 overheating issue, or non-issue, when it comes to, say, 4K 120 frames per second, who shoots for extended times at that setting? Not me. I rarely, if ever, shoot over a few seconds at 120 frames per second, and not often at 60 frames per second, especially in 8K. I don't shoot at 30 frames per second either, though I realize that a lot of people do. My go-to is 8K at 24 frames a second, again using the flat profile, and I've been very happy with the internal 10-bit. SDR, for me, that's for the majority of my work. It's so straightforward and returns excellent quality. As I've said here before, the Z9 was my first flagship, and now the Z8 is my prosumer backup. Nikon, I think, is now leaning hard into the prosumer market again, having slipped significantly over the last few years. They've made it quite clear recently that's their strategy, and going on the latest numbers, I think it's working very well for them. The most recent report I read showed a 28% increase in revenue and a 122% increase in operating profit for Nikon. And the Z9 is partly responsible for that upturn the last few years, and the Z8 will surely add to the positive outlook. When it comes to autofocus, if there was ever any situation where I felt the Z cameras struggled in the early days, it was in backlit situations. With the Z9 and now the Z8, those days are gone. Firmware updates for the Z9, 3.0 in particular, that further improved focusing in low contrast, low light conditions. And all these improvements trickled down to the Z8. And what we have now, in my experience, is autofocus that we couldn't have dreamed of just a few short years ago. It's just great. The other thing that's noticeable, as touted by Nikon, is the camera's ability to detect faces from further away now. And that is, when a face is smaller in the frame. And that is absolutely the case. I feel like I've kind of arrived at a Zen place in my Zed journey, with the Z9 as my sport wildlife camera and primary video recorder, the Z8 as a fantastic camera too, and quite often primary camera when weight is a consideration. And as of last month, the ZF as my walkabout travel camera. That itself sometimes becomes a B-roll camera when the 4K video is all I need. The video out of the ZF has much of the great stuff I love about the Z8 and Z9, especially internal 10-bit and Nikon's great flat profile. That's my go-to for most things I do. So it's 6 months. These are my observations and experiences with the Z8. And if it isn't apparent, I'm absolutely loving the experience. It's now the camera that I most often pull out of the cupboard. So I hope you found something useful. If you did, please do give this video the old thumbs up, and if this is your first time here, please do consider subscribing. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss a thing. In the meantime, take care. Cheers. We'll see you later.